Hi everyone, Mike Smith here. Recently I've started working with putting some quizzes into Moodle. I teach English as a second language and I'm putting some questions for my students into Moodle, the online learning management system. And I just wanted to explain what I'm doing, why I'm doing it this way, and also just to allay any possible concern about intellectual property issues that people may have, because I have mentioned that initially I'm using this wonderful book by Pauline Cullen, which is Common Mistakes at IELTS Intermediate, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm stealing her work, but I am building on the idea that she pioneered some years ago. So this short series of videos is to explain what I'm doing with quizzes, language quizzes in Moodle. Okay, so the great thing about this particular book is, as the title says, these are common mistakes at IELTS Intermediate. I teach Bridging English program at UQ St Lucia in Brisbane, Australia, and one of our issues, of course, is trying to plug the knowledge holes in language that our students have, because often they may have been studying English for some time in their own country. When they come to Australia, there may be gaps that have yet been unidentified in their language knowledge. And the problem is that on our courses, we don't really have time to identify where those mistakes are. So a book like this, which is based on many thousands of past tests conducted at IELTS Intermediate, identifying the common mistakes is really useful, because we can quite confidently say that our students are making these mistakes. I like the way this is laid out, because there are 30 units, each of which focus on a particular language point. And after each 3 units there's a little progress test. So as you work through the book with your class, and this is a library class set that we have in our school, so I can use it with my students in paper form. The wonderful thing is that as you go through this book, basically you are in effect covering all of the likely language issues that your students are going to have. So you don't have to spend time identifying common issues. And if you do go through this book, more than likely your time will be well spent. Also, the students can go through this in a sense independently, which is really good for saving time and also providing some means of self-access. Now, the self-access is a really important issue, because we have moved towards reducing class time and increasing self-directed study time. So it's really important that we look for opportunities where students can work on their own, and one key issue there is identifying and working on their weak points. So here's an example, and I'm going to just talk through what I'm doing with this material and why I'm putting it into Moodle, and also just explain that this is just a starting point for this work. Okay, so let's have a look at the first unit, which is Unit 1, focusing on the article, the definite article, the. Okay, now as you can see, I've started putting these questions into an online form, and that takes a bit of doing, because translating a paper version of a question which looks fairly straightforward here into an electronic form is actually pretty challenging. And for many years it was so challenging that perhaps language teachers kind of threw their hands up in despair. It was really hard to do. It's become easier now over the last decade or so, and so now I think it's got to the point where I certainly can relatively quickly create an online version of a paper quiz like this and have it work reasonably well. Now, before I get too far into this, I do need to address the intellectual property and copyright issues. We are in effect breaking the letter of the and possibly the spirit of the copyright restrictions on this by transferring this material into an electronic form. However, the reason I'm doing it is to show what benefits can be gained by presenting material like this in an electronic form, and also, secondly and importantly, to show teachers that it's possible for them to write their own questions. So once this framework is set up, what I'm going to do is replace all of these questions with questions that I've written myself. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, it clearly delineates the existing intellectual property, which I definitely wish to respect, while at the same time using them as a framework or an example for writing new material. The reason I'm interested in this is because I can tailor my questions for specific contexts. And my students are going to study in many different academic disciplines: science, engineering, economics, finance, marketing, hospitality, all sorts of things. And it's relatively easy to dream up questions that are focused towards those domains, which is going to help them. The language points are universal. It's just that the topic of the questions, the context of the questions, can be tailored. So that's the intention. The intention is not to use these particular questions in real live online form without the author's permission. I do hope Pauline likes what I've done here, but the intention is not just a straightforward copying. The intention is to show what can be done and to mimic only the knowledge that is represented in what common mistakes students actually have. I hope that allays some of the concerns. Okay, so now let's look at the mechanics of this. Okay, so again I emphasize the intention is to encourage teachers to write their own question bank here, and to show how not easy, but certainly how much easier it is now compared to in the past. Okay, so the idea is going from paper to electronic. That requires some effort, but what are the benefits? Why would we do this? There are three main benefits for this. The first one is in terms of feedback. So with a paper book like this, you've got your answer key at the back, and the answer key may be quite limited in providing reasons why there's this particular answer is correct. And what I've found in class is that students are sometimes misled to the point where they think their answer may be wrong when in fact perhaps it could be right in slightly different contexts or specific contexts, and we are often in that situation in the class. So if we can provide more detailed feedback, that's more useful for the students, and then this quiz can be a learning tool as well as an assessment tool. So in the online form, we can do that. We can provide much more detailed feedback. So for example, with these kinds of matching questions here, if we look in the design of that question, you can see that we can provide an answer, and there's space for much more detail in each of these answers, and we can also provide combined feedback for correct responses, partially correct responses, and incorrect responses. So I don't want to go too much detail into how that actually works, but the point is we can provide more feedback. And also, as you can see with this particular question, let's just go back to here. This was the original question. Here there were two options to choose from. But I know from my experience that there are some other options that may have been useful to present. And so I've expanded this to 4. And I've also introduced the idea that perhaps a particular option might be okay but is not very common. And this is relatively easy for a teacher to do. As you can see, question 2 here I've expanded from 2 to a wider variety, and so this then becomes a teaching tool or a self-directed learning tool for the student. So that's the first reason. feedback. Feedback is far more flexible and comprehensive and powerful in the online format. Okay, so next I'll go into the other two reasons. Okay, now the second reason is probably self-evident. Once you have gone to the effort of creating an online quiz, you can enroll as many students as you like in the course that contains this quiz. And you can have multiple quizzes in a course, and you can have multiple courses in a learning management system, and you can reuse these questions in multiple areas all over the place. So the effort invested in creating an online quiz, if it is well done, it can be multiplied infinitely. You can make them available to students in courses that are free, paid for, restricted to classes, and so all of that effort is follows the principle of write once, use many times, which is very, very effective. So you can feel confident that the effort that you put into designing your questions is time. Again, it's time well spent. And of course, for an individual teacher like myself, that's really important. But also for schools and for universities, paying staff to create these question banks has to be cost effective and worthwhile. So the online format inherently allows you to reuse material. Now, this concept of reusing material, it brings us to the third reason, and possibly the most powerful, compelling reason for doing this work in the first place. Let me explain what I mean. If we go back to the table of contents here, as you can see, there were 30 units, and this is a one-page layout. One of the reasons why I like this book is because it's achievable in a reasonable time frame. Some of the other grammar summary books, like Murphy for example, are really thick. They take a long time to go through and students get lost. Okay, so the idea here is that there's a little test, mini test sort of thing here, and then there's a teach section, and then there's an example with an image, which is usually a humorous one, and then there are some practice questions at the end. So this is a classic test, teach, test, and learn style lesson format, which is robust, well known, well understood. Okay, so you've got a couple of questions at the front there, and I tend to focus on these two at the front and these 8 at the back here. Wouldn't it be great if we could randomly choose questions from this table of content here to create a randomized, flexible progress test, so that you could quickly ask students, look, hey, can you just do this quiz? It's going to take about half an hour, 40 minutes, and that will just highlight to us which of these language points are weakest. And wouldn't it be great if all of that was plotted out in a spreadsheet or a graph for your whole class, your whole cohort, whether that's 10 students or 100 students? Wouldn't it be great if that was all done automatically? Wouldn't that save the teacher a lot of time? Well, that's basically what I'm on about here. Okay, so let's see how we can create a randomized quiz that will save the teacher time, provide useful metrics on the class, allowing the teacher or the individual student to focus effort where it is best focused. Okay, so randomized quizzes have in themselves a number of benefits. One is that you can reuse a question bank for students and be reasonably sure that they're not going to strike the same question if they do the quiz again later. That saves the teacher a lot of time, and it also means if the randomizing functions happens at the time the quiz is actually attempted, then as you add more questions to the question bank, you don't have to worry about the design of the quiz. The quiz will automatically randomly choose from the increasingly large question bank. So that's a really useful thing for a teacher or a school that is adding to a question, adding to a set of quizzes. You add to the question bank, and that automatically adds to the range of each of the randomized quizzes. So you don't have to do all of your work up front. You can get started and then build. Okay, so let's look at a non-randomized quiz first for this first topic. So there's 2 questions there and 8 questions here, a total of 10 questions. This quiz here in topic 1 is all of those presented in one page. Very, very similar to the paper version on the right hand side. There's nothing randomized here. The only benefit really of doing this is, the 2 benefits is that you can give it to as many students as you like, and also it's collating the data automatically for you. Okay, so that's the starting point. But it may be that your students don't have time to do 8 questions, because if you think about it, maybe a minute each questions, that's 10 minutes for this page, but there are 30 pages, so that quickly adds up to a lot of time. If your aim is only to identify problem areas, you don't want them to do all 8 questions. So instead what you do is, let me just go back to here. Instead what you do is let's choose one random question from section 1 here and say 4 random questions from section 3. That's possible to do, and this is an example of that here. So what's happening is that when the quiz is being attempted, the quiz generator will select a random one from here. Now there's only 2 to choose from, but that's okay. There's 8 to choose from here, and it chooses 4 of them, so just half. Okay, that's random, and not at the time of quiz design, but at the time of quiz attempt. So that gives you a slightly shorter quiz for each unit. But it doesn't stop there. What about if we created a quiz that randomly takes one question from section 1 in each of these units and say 2 questions from section 3 in each of these quizzes. So what we're talking about is just choose one of these and 2 of these from all of the units in turn, and that's what I've created here. So I'll just open that up. I've added up the number of questions. It's about 40 questions, so I'm going to give them 40 minutes to do that. I don't need to give them a time limit, but perhaps I do. I do want to. Okay, so the way that I've set this up is that each unit is still paginated for the same page. So as you can see, this first one here is to do with the definite article, and then the next page is the next unit, which is singular and plural, and so on and so forth. And there's a really nice quiz navigation here, so they can go to the next 3 questions or the last 3 questions. They can go forward and backwards, and of course we can still set feedback, and we can have a grading function. But the beauty of this is that you can give this same quiz to people at different stages of a course for minimal extra effort for the student, for the teacher. And of course, because it's an online learning management system, it will log everything, and we can then generate reports for individual students or for the class or for the entire cohort. So I haven't got this done in time for my current Bridging English program course, but it will be ready for the next one, and I'd like to do progress testing every week. Trying to do that in paper form would just be too much work. We just don't have time to do that. But online, I can set it for homework, You know, the learning management system will take care of logging each individual's progress. They can see their own progress as well. As we go through, we can actually do some statistical analysis of this data in the long term, and that's one of my long-term goals. Okay, so that in a nutshell, very briefly, is what I'm trying to achieve with creating quizzes in Moodle based on the philosophy of this book by Pauline Cullen. Once again, just to make absolutely clear, the idea here is to use this as a prototype, a framework, an example. What we want to do is empower teachers to write their own material that they feel is useful in the short and medium and long term, and whilst at the same time paying homage to this wonderful approach that Pauline has taken, and one which many teachers have used successfully in the class to help their students, which is what it's all about. So thanks very much for your time.